everybody, this is the Wikstrand, so the Lethal Weapon movies. Now, my opinion about them is basically the following. I think that the first one and the second one are absolute stone cold classics that absolutely holds up and are fantastic movies. The third one and the fourth one has that in common that it is not as good as the two first and generally is hurting a lot from not having Shane Black as a writer. Of the two, I would say that I think the third one is probably the weakest in the series of Riggs and Murtaugh. So we're just going to try to find out today why this movie is not quite as good as the other ones. Is it just Shane Black's writing that is missing? No. Is it just the fact that we're having a boring villain? Well, some of it can be attributed to that, but let's find out what this movie is about, shall we? This is Lethal Weapon 3. Lethal Weapon 3 begins with a bang, literally. It begins with them blowing up a building, and not just any building, a real building. It was actually Old City Hall in Orlando that was going to be demolished. So the filmmaker said, hey, why don't we demolish it and capture it on film? So they did, and the sequence is fantastic. And the scene before that in the parking garage when they're trying to defuse the bomb, that was so much fun, and it was one of the most entertaining and hilarious sequences in the entire movie. And to be fair, actually one of my favorite sequences in the entirety of the Lethal Weapon franchise. However, this city demolishing relegates them to, writing parking tickets and stuff like that. But that doesn't stop them from participating in, high-speed chase and capturing some bad guys. But in the process of doing so, they encounters a ruthless gang led by former police officer Jack Travis, who has now turned into a black market arms dealer, played by the way by Stuart Wilson. And his effort to steal cocaine and steal guns and stuff like that, and flooding the streets of them might turn the entire city into an all-out war zone. Are they going to be able to stop them? We shall see. Helping them is of course returning character Leo Getz, played by a blonde Joe Pesci. No, Joe, you shouldn't go blonde. Blonde Joe Pesci is horrible. But they also get another character that's introduced. Lauren, played by the very underrated, very talented and very elegant Rene Russo. She's an internal affair investigator, and unlike most other internal affair investigators that were populating the cop movies in the 80s and the 90s, she's not an asshole. And she and Riggs actually starts having a thing with each other. The question is, will she go the ever not so successful routes of previous love interest or and/wives of Riggs, aka Dead? We shall see. The story of Lethal Weapon 3 is not its strongest part. In fact, it's kind of mundane and kind of boring and not very interesting. The war they have with Travis' gang isn't that interesting, and it's not very suspenseful. I love the sequence where Riggs is, becoming friends with a dog when they, stalking some, warehouse or stuff like that. I also love the sequence he has with Russo when they are, comparing scars and stuff like that. It is actually one of my favorite romantic sequences in an action movie that I've ever seen. It is one of these sequences that on paper sounds really hokey and very ridiculous, but shooting it actually worked, and they have great chemistry together. So, job well done. When it comes to the action sequences, they are fine. There is a pretty fun and very spectacular motorcycle chase that ends in a very impressive, eye-opening stunt. But we also have to talk about the climax of the movie, where they go to Travis' sort of headquarters, which is located in this, housing project, which, will catch fire and burn to the ground and stuff like that. The thing is that was an actual housing project that had been abandoned for, a year or two, and they actually burned it to the ground for realsies, making this movie, from a visual standpoint, very impressive. The problem with that sequence is that they are taking on Jack Travis. Stuart Wilson is one of the biggest problems this movie has, because, let's face it, Jack Travis is a very boring villain. He could have been so much better. I mean, if Alec Baldwin would have played him, or Gene Hackman, or James Caan, or Robert De Niro, or Michael Keaton, you know, all of those people were considered for the role, but it eventually went to Wilson instead. If any of those people would have played Jack Travis, do you think the movie would have been better? I would say that it's almost definitely, because if you're looking backwards, Gary Busey's fantastic psychopath in the first one, the hateful and awful, you know, diplomatic immunity guy from the second one, and of course Jet Li, who almost single-handedly saved Lethal Weapon 4 with his awesome presence and ass-kicking ability. That was fucking great. So while the climax was pretty good, it was still not very interesting, because we didn't really care about whether or not Riggs or Murtaugh would make it out alive, or if they would be able to beat Travis or something like that. It was very mundane, and it was very so-and-so. Lethal Weapon 3 is a well-produced, big-budget, entertaining 90s action movie. But comparing it to the first one and the second one, this doesn't feel like a passion project for Richard Donner, more as a paycheck. And the tone of the movie and the atmosphere of the movie has changed severely. Gone is the very serious and very somber tone that the first movies had. They did have humoristic moments, but it was mostly, you know, what the characters did and stuff like that that was so absurd that it was kind of funny. But the third one, and especially the fourth one, went into a more goofy, more light-hearted and less serious route, and some people might argue that that made the movies more fun and more entertaining. To that I say maybe, but if we could have, you know, retained Shane Black's writing, then maybe we could have, you know, had both a more fun movie and with the serious tone left and the very sharp and fantastic Shane Black writing. But I guess he was just so tired at that point of, you know, battling with the studios or whether or not he could kill Riggs or not. However, there are these sequences in this movie that is very serious, it is very heavy. You know, when Murtaugh is killing that teenager that, you know, has bought that Uzi that from Travis, and, you know, he's being, you know, crying at the boat and stuff like that. Those sequences feels out of place in this movie, especially because, you know, all the other goofy nonsense that goes on. And that sequence sticks out like a sore thumb and goes on way too long. Speaking of way too long, I love title sequences. I think every movie should have a title sequence where, you know, say that Richard Donner directed this, and Mel Gibson and Danny Glover is starring in this movie, and Joe Pesci and Rene Russo and stuff like that. But you could have made a more fun title sequence than having these flame things and having Eric Clapton sing that dreadful, boring song. It's hard to say it, I hate to say it, it was probably me. It was probably you who made me almost fall asleep when I watched the intro to this movie, you asshole. But the question remains, should you see this movie? Short answer, yes. It is an okay movie, it is a sort of entertaining movie, and there are bits about it that is very, very cool and very spectacular and funny and entertaining. But there are huge sections of this movie that is just boring and not very interesting, like the hockey game or the interrogation sequence and stuff like that. It just makes you go, come on, can we, you know, pick up the pace now? In the end, Lethal Weapon 3 is a completely okay movie, but doesn't leave any lasting impression. Even though this movie is very well produced, have some big stars, have some big action sequences, and I do appreciate that Jack Travis never threatens or kidnaps any of Murtaugh's family, because it seems like that was the only thing they were good for the first two movies, so at least we have that. But I still cannot give this movie more than 51 points. The chemistry between Mel Gibson and Danny Glover is still off the walls, and Joe Pesci does have a couple of funny lines, so it has that going on for itself also. Fun fact, did you know that this movie actually has a post-credit sequence? In the end of the movie, you see how, you know, Murtaugh and Riggs are, you know, going away, and they get another bomb call, and Riggs says, we're on it, and he said, no, we'll wait for the bomb squad this time. And then when they come to this hotel or whatever it is, and before they even have a chance to exit the car, the building blows up. And they say, they're never gonna believe it wasn't us. We're too old for this shit. They both say. So the sequence in Lethal Weapon 4 where Riggs says, I'm too old for this shit, is actually not the first time he said it. He said it in the third one. The more you know. Anyway, I'll see you next time for, well, so-and-so reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.